Thank you, Anne. This is not a sermon. So, I just want to share a few thoughts with you that will help you to continue pondering what God might have been saying to you this morning. I just thought I'd give a bit of background. I'm sure you know this, but some of you may not realise that this is the only miracle that Jesus did that's in all 4 Gospels. So that's quite interesting in itself. And the longest version was the one from John. I was going to say was our dramatised version. Was in John's account that Anne just read to us. When you look at all 4 Gospels and see what happened before this miracle, you can see that it took place after a lot of activity and busyness. In Matthew's Gospel, we read that the disciples had not long returned from their mission. John the Baptist had just been beheaded, so that's horrific busyness, horrific things had happened. And in Mark, we see that Jesus and his disciples are trying to take a break, which is why they sailed away to a deserted place. Because at this point, the crowds were starting to follow Jesus. There was a momentum going, and people who were desperate for healing were going to him for healing. The word had got out. By taking the boat, and I love that guys you probably didn't see them at home, but when the boat was coming up, that was quite fun when they were acting it out. But in all seriousness, by taking the boat, I imagine they probably took the boat and went across the sea to probably escape the crowds so they couldn't follow them as easily, hoping that they'd have a bit of peace and quiet, a bit of restoration. But that didn't happen. The crowd followed. And as I read this week and been pondering it, 3 things stood out to me, and I just want to share them with you. Firstly, Jesus' heart stood out to me, the way he was towards the people. Secondly, the disciples and their heart attitudes. And thirdly, the boys' generosity. Although we don't really hear about that. He might have not really wanted them to have his lunch, but I'm sure they did. So firstly, Jesus' heart. I think when you look at all the activity that had previously happened, all of the busyness, and the fact that his cousin John the Baptist had just died, Jesus must have been tired. He must have been thinking about the cross because of what just happened to John. They'd obviously gone to get some space, but his heart is a heart full of compassion and love towards these people. And that really jumped out to me. He saw their needs. He forgot about his own needs and saw their needs. That was his first response. And that just resonated with me and reminded me of that's God's first response to us. Even when we're in a mess of our own making, God looks at us with compassion and love. Secondly, the disciples. In John's account, I love it, Jesus chooses to involve the disciples in the work of feeding, of caring for these people. He doesn't need to, but he chooses to share with them. And that resonated with me and reminded me that God still shares his work, but he wants to share it with us. And the other half of that second thing that stood out to me was the attitudes of the disciples in being asked to participate in Jesus' works. Philip, and this resonated with me, I can be a Philip or Andrew, depending on what day it is and how I'm feeling. Philip sees problems. It really stood out to me when Anne read it. It would take nearly a year's wages. It's kind of like, are you joking? I wonder if there's a bit of sarcasm there, I don't know. And then Andrew is different. He looks, and that stood out to me when it was acted out, actually. He looks and sees the possibility. Look over there, there's a possibility here. Which one of these reflects your response to Jesus' call? And for me, it can be both of them at different times. And finally, the third point that jumped out to me was this boy who gave all that he had, small as it was, that he was generous and handed it over. We don't read about him saying, give me my lunch back, so we think that he was happy for it to go. And Jesus multiplied it and did amazing things with it. And that just resonated with me, that whatever we offer to God, however small it is, he can use it and do amazing things. So they're my points. Jesus is a heart for us, cares for us, and has compassion on us. He calls us to share in his work. Are we Philip-like or Andrew-like in our response? And do we trust like that boy did? Do we trust Jesus with what we have? Surrender it to him, knowing that he will do amazing things for his kingdom. And those are my points. There's something else that jumped out today that I hadn't thought of before, and that was that Caroline was playing Jesus, although I think we need to get a beard for when you're playing Jesus. I used to do that in Weymouth, wear a beard if I was playing one of the disciples or Jesus. But that she acted that sharing and blessing at the communion table. And that really stood out to me. And in a way, when we share communion, we're celebrating the Lord's Supper, but we're also celebrating God's provision for us and God's care for us in Jesus. And I think today, when I come and receive communion, it will be of a different perspective because of that drama.